Culture. What is culture? This word that defines humans, this word that defines so many things, what is it? We hear about culture wars on the news. We hear about culture through exploring other cultures or finding connection with our culture. We hear about culture in all these different contexts, but what is culture? This term came about in the 15th century and we're still arguing what it means to this day. So, what does it mean? Originally speaking, culture came from the word cultivate. Think like in agriculture, you grow things from the ground and cultivate crops. Culture came to mean cultivating new ideas and the best ideas. Only the best works of art, only the best things that inspire growth is culture. Now this idea is known as the ideal version of culture. And it came out in the 15th century as an elitist view to help be like, we are the ones that have culture, us the upper class, you peasants down there don't have culture. And this became problematic and quite clearly so. In the 1800s, social scientists realized, hey, if we're going to study how people live and work, we need a term for it. And hey, there's this term talking about the way people live. What if we start applying it to more than just the elites? And this is how the social view of culture came about. This view came from anthropology and decided, hey, culture is not just the greatest ideas. It's not just about furthering human development. Culture is a way of life. It is how these people live and grow and think and interact with the world. And that became the social mode of culture. And then later on, actually a more modern view of culture came about. What if culture isn't a way of life? Because when you go to another country, not that many big things are different and we have this overemphasized view of culture. What if culture is really just what we produce? What if culture is the works of art that a group of people from this region makes? What if it's the literature and grand ideas that these groups and people make all around the world, including ourselves? That became the documentation style of culture. If you want a great example of it, look at archaeology. They study culture through how people produced and left behind artifacts. These three definitions, ideal, social, and documentation, work pretty well, right? Right? But there's still more to culture. When we talk about culture wars, or we talk about, hey, this is my culture, or hey, this is pop culture. What does that mean? Well, let's say we have a graph. Up here is high culture, down here is low culture, folk culture, and mass culture. These four axes interact with each other in such a deep and interesting way. But what are they? Let's start with high culture. High culture. What is it? We originate not from general ways of life, no. We take the ideal view of culture. The idea that culture comes not from below, but from above. Culture comes from how we cultivate ideas and to separate ourselves from the peasantry such as you. So, what do we do as part of high culture? Well, you see, we do what you can't. A defining aspect of our high culture is exclusivity. Going and traveling to Europe is now popular? How about taking a year to India to find yourself? You're able to afford caviar and other high-class foods? No. We must now reinvent some classic foods and make sure they're exclusive to us now. High culture, you can see us in brands not like Gucci, but rather ones that give plain clothes that you've never heard of, that you only know about with a nod and a wink to another member of high culture. This elitist view is placed towards the top of the hierarchy and is defined as being the ones leading the cultural ideas found within a society, especially one of those which is capitalistic in nature. Often you'll find members of us looking like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, the British royal family, and other wonderful elites of the upper class. You'll rarely find us with those in the lower cultures. What about low culture? Why are we looked down upon? Yeah, we are the cultural opposite of high culture. We are seen as less fancy than them. Tailgating games, drinking Bud Light, having a Monster to boost ourselves, none of that fancy lattes. We're defined not necessarily as being less than high culture, despite being defined as that. that in a hierarchical scale, but we're seen as the culture of the masses, but less intelligent for some reason. Now, this ain't true. You can ask any one of us, we ain't that dumb. But we're seen as it. Oftentimes, our culture, our way of life is seen as lesser. We're from the Appalachians, we're from the South, we're from wherever typically holds more conservative values, but our culture's treated as if we're just stupid for having it. Yeah, we buy cheap clothes, we don't do trendy things, and a lot of what we consume is mass-produced, but hey, that doesn't make it bad. That just makes us low culture. But we're not without culture. You know, there's something authentic about it. What about folk culture? Howdy y'all, what about folk culture? So you see, we are defined less by what the high culture count says as exclusive and from the top. We're defined as coming from the bottom. We are a community-built culture. So, well, I'm defining that through my cowboy lens. We can see this in the punk scene. We can see this in local community activism. That's folk culture. Folk culture comes from authenticity, comes from the community coming together and building up its own thing. Classic community theater is part of folk culture. So is folk music, which has been used as a way of political messaging. To, as I mentioned, punks. They are a big aspect of folk culture. So folk, what is it? We're authentic. We're people-driven. We ain't handed our culture, we built it up from the ground. Together as a community, we decided to make ourselves who we are, and that's folk culture. Now, we are quite different from mass culture over there. Mass culture. We are the manufactured culture for the masses. Think celebrity, think fame, think books like Harry Potter that's been produced and read by millions. That's us. Difference we have with low culture is we're not given a trashy or tacky aesthetic that people tend to disagree with. Our sports are more like tennis. Sports are not like WWE. Yeah. No, that stuff, while it's also mass-produced much like us, has a lower status. Well, us mass culture, we don't have a lower status compared to them. If anything, we're above them. Unlike folk culture, which is authentic from the ground up, we come from think tanks, we come from data analysis, we come from watching your market trends and trying to produce to you. Yeah, you the consumer, come buy our product, come take our tour, listen to our music from pop culture. So, what is that? Last but far from least is pop culture. We're a combination of the mass culture that's produced for everyone and the folk culture communities that spring up. We are the home of fandom. We are the home of AO3. When you think of communities such as Swifties or the anime community, cosplayers, that's us. We take manufactured content and turn it into authentic community. Let's take that Taylor Swift example for a minute. Now, Taylor Swift is manufactured. When I say that, I don't mean to say she isn't being authentic in her music. I don't know her, and she wouldn't have such a big fan base if she was just faking every last bit of her personality. However, her songs, her tours, her public persona is made to get views, to get clicks, and to drive movement within the Swiftie community. This isn't bad. This is not to say it's bad, but that's mass media. That's mass culture. But then what happens when this is produced and left to the world? People like Swifties take it and turn it into their own. They combine it with other media they love. Kermit is my boyfriend. Kermit is a frog. That's funny. If you are a fan of the Muppets and a fan of Taylor Swift, that is an expression of your personality through mass culture. It's taking the authentic parts of folk and the mass-produced media of mass culture and turning it into a fandom. If you've ever read a fanfic, that is part of pop culture. If you've ever wrote a fanfic, you've produced pop culture. Content creation, hell, even parts of this video you can argue is pop culture. Pop culture is what turns simple consumption into a community. Into creativity. It's where people find their stride. A lot of channels, including this one, are baked in pop culture because we take people we love and we shift the ideas and make it our own. This video for example, comes out of pop culture. I've taken big channel styles like Big Tug, the ideas of CGP Grey, and the humor of a few other channels and made it my own through a sociological lens. That's pop culture. You making content is pop culture. I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, and I know this is a goofy outfit. My girlfriend let me borrow this shirt for this bit, but I feel like this part of culture, this overlooked part of culture, is what is defining culture in this generation. We can look at memes. Memes are a grand example of pop culture. We take an idea and change it. We make it our own for our community. We make fun of it. We interact with it. Pop culture comes from that interaction with the world. The human need to be social comes out through pop culture in a lot of modern societies. We see this in China on their platforms. We see this in the US with ours. We see this wherever there is a competition between a capitalist-produced culture and community. And that competition isn't gonna end because community ain't gonna die, and there's always gonna be a new big thing. So that's pop culture. Now, before I conclude this video, let me change into something a bit better. There we go. That's pop culture, that's high culture, low culture, mass culture, folk culture, an ideal version of culture, social definition of culture, documentary style. There's a lot to understand with culture in such a short video. And this is still just scratching the surface. Now, I don't know about you, but I really don't know what culture is. I see pop culture as an amazing tool to view culture. I mean, hell, this shirt is inspired by pop culture. The mass-produced trends of, hey, let's throw some guy's face on a shirt and my own spin on it with it being my own face. So, what is culture? Culture is what you make it, realistically. You can take any of these definitions, you can take all of them, you can take some, you can take none. That's up to you. But culture is worth understanding. If we don't understand culture, we don't understand other people. When I say this, I'm not telling you to be quote-unquote culturally competent. That idea is having its reckoning in the social sciences right now. But what I am asking you to do is when it comes to ideas of culture, what is someone's culture? Have some humility around it. Now, one last definition before we go. Cultural humility. It's this idea that we can learn as much as we want about culture, but culture is dynamic. Culture is something people live in. Throughout all the examples we give, including the documentary style of culture, these either are or were living people who experience these things. So when you're interacting with someone who says, oh, this is from my culture, or corrects you on something cultural if you're in a new area, stay humble about it. Don't worry about being perfect with culture. No one ever will be. Rather, instead of trying to be confident with all things culture, have humility. I hope I haven't talked your ear off too much about culture. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you come and stay. Check out my other videos. I'm trying to produce more now, so hopefully this trend keeps going. It's going to take some time. I'm still a college student after all. But yeah, I hope you join me on this journey. Noah out.